In business today, three things to know. First, stuck on the roads and grounded from the air. The Thanksgiving travel rush is off to a crummy start as winter derails plans along the U.S. East Coast. Then, counting all the data, jobless claims, durable goods orders, consumer spending, and more, all coming in today. We'll run through the numbers. And the new liquid asset, how investing in whiskey can be intoxicating. Arise Xchange starts now. Hello, everyone. I'm Andrew Schmertz. I wanted to start with the whiskey segment, but alas, the powers that be said I, and therefore you, will have to wait. So we'll start with travel. It's the rush out the door to visit family and friends. Americans are taking to the roads and to the skies in cars, planes, maybe a horse or two to get around this weather. The weather through the Midwest and along the East Coast has made this a tough trip. According to FlightAware, more than 600 flights have been canceled, many more delayed, and the roads are slow going. Robert Sinclair from AAA is here to give us some tips so we can get to the turkey quicker. Robert, thank you. Welcome back to Arise Xchange. Always a pleasure to have you here. Give us an overview of what the travel situation looks right now.
Well, so far not so bad if you're driving. The weather hasn't been as bad as we thought. There's been a lot of rain. It hasn't really shifted over to snow for most of the I-95 corridor, which is really going to be hit hard. That's the busiest highway in the country, going back and forth between a lot of major population
I-95,
centers.
so people don't know, runs from Maine to Florida.
To Florida, yeah, and a lot of major cities along the road, and it gets very busy.
Heading to Florida, probably, instead of Maine.
I wish I was one of them.
Yeah. They're expecting 46.3 million travelers. That's the highest since 2007. What is driving sort of that level of travel this year?
Well, when you consider 89% of them will be driving, you have to really look at gasoline prices, and they've been falling now for 60 days straight. We're at an average of around $2.81 a gallon nationwide, and that's really like the wind in the sails. It's estimated that there'll be an additional $36 billion in drivers' pockets as a result of savings on gasoline in the fourth quarter. When you travel, you need money. It's a leading economic indicator, if you will.
That's true.
I know when you go out, you eat, you shop, you go to shows, all sorts of things. It's estimated that 7 out of 10 jobs have a direct or indirect link to travel. So the economy is very important.
Yeah, it's interesting you mention that because obviously municipalities do better because they collect more tolls on the roads.
Yeah.
That probably means they have to fix the roads a little bit more often.
If only.
If only. But and also the people who own the little gas marts along the way where people stock up on food. Historically, is driving really it's that sensitive to oil prices, right? When gas prices come down, people say they want to go someplace.
It can be, and we look at vehicle sales, which are very strong this year, and now we're seeing a lot of pickup trucks for sale and larger vehicles, and it's all because of short-term memory. Gasoline prices are cheaper, and people go for those big, heavy, thirsty vehicles. It is a very, very sensitive market as far as travel and vehicle purchases.
Interestingly, though, airfares are up,
right, and
travel on the airlines is up as well, and so that has got to be causing some clogging at the airports.
Yeah, well, slightly. Airfares are up by about 1%. We're seeing overall travel up about 3%. So it's not that real surge that you might expect. Employments for the year are actually pretty level compared to last year. So it's not really happening in the air where we see all these extra people. It's happening on the roads, and we're seeing an additional 1.9 million people this year compared to last.
What can you tell us about hotel rates and hotel occupancy this holiday?
Hotel rates are up about 8%, more in AAA 3-diamond rated hotels. And really, maybe not so sensitive with this holiday, because this is really the family holiday. People go and they stay with friends and family. They might not be using hotels as much, so it's not that kind of a huge impact on this kind of holiday compared to others.
Do people, when they travel heavily in Thanksgiving on the roads, do they then not travel more towards Christmas?
No, actually, the week between Christmas and New Year's is the busiest travel period of the year because of its length. Upwards of 55 million people will travel then. And generally, the kids are off of school and you want to go out and do things, and it's really an opportunity for people to take a longer trip, but the weather can impact that.
Okay, Robert Sinclair from AAA. As always, thank you and have a good Thanksgiving.
Thank you, you too.
Appreciate you coming by. Well, the markets will be closed on Thanksgiving, and today was a relatively light trading day. Let's take a look at the final numbers. The Dow finishing up 12 3/4 to 17,827. The S&P 500 up as well, and the NASDAQ pushing higher. Some of the top stocks we're watching today. Amazon started sales early this holiday shopping season, cutting the price of its Fire phone the day before Thanksgiving. Frankly, Amazon can't give them away, so it doesn't much matter. Amazon has also rolled out an online marketplace to find professional services in your local area. Amazon closing down $1.50. UPS ramping up hiring to prepare for the holiday shopping season, and that could be considered a leading indicator of how well it thinks the shopping season will go. United Parcel Service expects to hire up to 95,000 seasonal employees throughout the season up until January. UPS closing down 14 cents. And Netflix is suing a former vice president and the current chief information officer at Yahoo for fraud. The suit alleges that Mike Kale took kickbacks from companies he connected to the web streaming service while serving as VP of Netflix. Netflix closing up $2.38. And a quick look at commodities. Gold pulling back, and oil down again. We were talking about gas prices, down 51 cents to $73.58 a barrel. Tomorrow in Vienna, the OPEC summit begins, and we will see if they're able to rally and cut up capacity. It's not expected that they will do so. Right now, there is some analysts out there saying that oil could drop to $35 a barrel. Jobless claims ticked up 21,000 last week to a seasonally adjusted 313,000. That's above 300,000 for the first time since early September. We'll talk about that in a moment. Orders for durable goods rose 0.4% in October. That went against the projected decline. And consumer spending rose modestly in October, up 0.2%. Here to talk about what all that means for the economy moving forward is Peter Cardillo. He is Chief Market Economist at Rockwell Global Capital. Peter, good to see you again.
Good to be back.
All right, you look at all these numbers. It's sort of a data dump right before the holiday, isn't it?
Yes, it was. There was a rush of economic data today. And basically, what it's all about is, with the holiday and Friday being a half a day, these reports were basically anticipated, as the jobs market report was, jobless claims.
Usually that comes out on Thursday.
Yeah, that comes out on Thursdays. But anyway, we had some pretty good numbers today, even though some were a little bit disappointing. We saw a modest rise in consumer spending and personal income. And then, of course, we saw durable goods orders actually tick up a bit, and that was due mostly to defense.
When it comes to durable goods, it's Boeing, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Extent.
It's a very volatile index, and so it really doesn't give you a clear picture of really what's happening. But if you look at the Chicago ISM PMI index, which came out today, that was a bit of a disappointment because we saw the index actually fall more than we anticipated, and that was mostly due to new orders. And I suspect that the reason for that is, with this slowdown in the global economy is certainly beginning to take its toll a bit. But that doesn't mean
starting to contaminate us a little bit here.
A little bit, but not by much, because I think that there's a lot of stamina right now in the U.S. economy, and I think that growth in this quarter, the fourth quarter, probably be a little bit north of 3%, and probably in 2015.
We had a nice revision to the GDP yesterday. So,
yeah, exactly. But and that's what I'm saying. So I don't think we can see 4% sustainable. Due to the global economy weakness.
I want to ask you about personal income, because this goes to the concept of wage inflation, doesn't it? And that at some point the Fed and everybody wants to see people earning a little bit more money. Why still disappointing, and when do you see that turning around?
I don't see that turning around anytime soon, because I think that, if you look at non-farm productivity, that's been basically a little bit on the low side, which ordinarily that's a good sign in terms of inflation. So with overall inflation being very much contained, it's going to be very difficult for wages to go up anytime soon. Now, that doesn't mean it's not going to happen, but I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon within the next 6 or perhaps
a year.
And
so if you connect the dots then, because the Fed has been talking about wage inflation, and that's something they want to see, though they keep moving the rules of the game, or changing the rules of the game a little bit, then are we to say that interest rates are not going to be ticking up?
Well, if you base it on let's say, an average of 3.5% gross domestic product, obviously, you would think that at one point the Fed is going to be would want to rush and begin to change monetary policy. But the other problem is their global economy. And as long as Europe continues to flirt with deflation and China continues to weaken, I think the Fed is going to be patient, simply because of the fact that there is no real wage inflation. And inflation, unless the average ticks up above 2%, which is the Fed's target rate, I doubt very much that they're going to surprise the markets by changing monetary policy before at least the first half of the year.
All right, and finally, for the final quarter of 2014, what are your estimates as far as the GDP and the overall economy?
I think
Any
we're looking
surprises?
at around this quarter maybe 3.25%, and for 2015 we're probably going to average around 3.5%.
Okay, Peter, have a good Thanksgiving. Thank
You
you.
too.
Coming up, why investors pulling out of the housing market and what it means for your home's value. And later, an NFL star tackles the league for perceived hypocrisy. You're watching Rise Exchange. Stay with us.
Unrest continues in Ferguson, Missouri. Exactly what happened to Michael Brown Jr.'s memorial. The NFL fallout continues. Why does this video change the game? President Barack Obama met with congressional leaders today.
He does not need congressional approval to carry out the strikes.
The only language understood by killers like this is the language of force.
Do I want to have a draft? No, because I don't want to have war.
Hello and welcome to Rise America. I'm Debbie Turner-Bell.
Welcome back to Rise Exchange. We have some mixed data on housing. New home sales rose 0.7% in October, according to the Commerce Department, while pending home sales dipped 1.1% in October, according to the National Association of Realtors. So, will rising interest rates, or the potential of rising interest rates, and slow wage growth hamper the housing market? Let's bring in Lawrence Yun. He is Chief Economist and Senior Vice President of Research at the National Association of Realtors. Lawrence, welcome to Rise Exchange. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me on the show.
You know, we keep hearing about how investors had propped up the housing market for some extent, going in there and buying property for investment purposes. They are now pulling out. So the big question here is, can sort of the retail market, can individuals support the levels that we have right now?
The investors had comprised about 25% of our purchases, and it has come down in recent months to about 15%. So certainly investors have stepped away. For retail buyers, there's still a tremendous amount of pent-up demand. And as you mentioned, there was some mixed signal regarding the new home sales rising, the pending home sales declining a bit. But if one looks at the year as a whole, what one clearly sees is that the first half was slow, second half much better, and the momentum for improvement continues to develop. So despite 1 month of slight volatility, I anticipate that sales activity will be rising going into next year as long as the job gains continues.
Okay, so you're tying it mainly to job gains, and I'm just wondering which is a better indicator, the new home sales or the pending home sales, because they kind of conflict a little bit. Does one have a better track record of telling us where the housing market is going?
The pending home sales comprise 90 or 95% of the total market. New home sales is a very small market, and it's more expensive market. Newly constructed homes are selling roughly about 30 or 40% price premium. So one would have to look at the pending to gauge the overall market condition. And the second half is notably better than compared to the first half.
Has the market equalized when it comes to getting foreclosures out of the market? Because that was one of the things that people were saying was holding back the housing market for a long time, is that people were staying in homes that were being foreclosed on.
Well, much of the foreclosed property has been flushed out, so that right now the number of distressed properties that could potentially hit the market is about 1/3 of what it was compared to, say, 3 years ago during the bad times. So the number of foreclosed properties are coming down, and that's very positive for home price projections, because distressed property carries a large price discount, and with fewer of them, that means that one will get a price elevation. And furthermore, as long as there is an increased buying from job creation, there will be an added additional demand to the overall market conditions.
I have to ask you about mortgage rates. What we've seen is that this market continues to be very sensitive to mortgage rates. If they tick up a little bit, you start to see a dip. Is that sort of sensitivity going to continue through 2015? And therefore, if mortgage rates start to rise, what impact do you see?
Well, housing is always very sensitive to changes in interest rates. Some initial phase of rising interest rate actually brings more buyers into the market as there's a final rush to catch the low rates. But any sustained rise in interest rate is clearly bad for the market. However, there is one caveat, and that one caveat is that we have had an extremely stringent underwriting standards past few years, and there are many signs that the banking system will loosen up some of the lending requirement back more towards normal, not the lax underwriting standards of the bubble years. And furthermore, the federal government is trying to change some of the policies to help, to move towards less stringent conditions. So I think that compensating factor of less stringent underwriting standards can easily help out in terms of a rising interest rate environment.
Lawrence Yun, Chief Economist of the National Association of Realtors from Washington, D.C. Have a good Thanksgiving. Thank you.
Thank you.
Time now for our business ticker. Stories making headlines across the nation and the world. Under pressure from environmental groups, President Obama is ordering new air pollution regulations. The Environmental Protection Agency is pushing for lower caps on ground ozone emissions from power plants and exhaust pipes. The EPA projects the new restrictions will cut the level of acceptable ozone pollution by 20%. The European economy may be getting a big boost. The president of the European Commission says that a $360 billion stimulus package is needed to restore momentum in the Eurozone. The proposal would release $360 billion into the member states over the next 3 years. Leaders of the 28 EU nations will take up the proposal during next month's EU summit. Germany has a plan to increase the number of women sitting on corporate boards by forcing companies to hire them. A new directive from the German government says companies now have to have at least 30% women on their supervisory boards. The new regulation was announced by Chancellor Angela Merkel and was approved by leaders of both political parties. And talk about putting your money where your mouth is. A New York City restaurant is offering Thanksgiving dinner for $38,000. And that does not include the tip. The menu at the Old Homestead Steakhouse in downtown Manhattan includes foie gras, stuffed squab marinated in cognac, organic turkey dressed with Wagyu beef, caviar in sweet potatoes, truffle-infused squash, and gold-flaked bourbon-soaked pears. So far, 4 people have made reservations for the fancy feast. I am waiting for my invitation. 2 players are speaking out about what they call hypocrisy in the National Football League. Seattle Seahawks players Richard Sherman and Doug Baldwin called a press conference yesterday to blast the league on its double standards, including a fine it levied on their teammate Marshawn Lynch for refusing to talk to the media. Here is sort of the parody news conference they gave.
You know, the other day, Marshawn Lynch got fined $100,000. Did you know that? $100,000. And it's like, they wouldn't even paid him $100,000 if he had talked. If he had spoken. Doug, do you think they would have paid him $100,000?
No, they sure wouldn't have.
Jeez Louise. But you know who does pay me a lot of money? Beats by Dre, the wonderful headphones that I wear.
I like those headphones.
But the league doesn't let me say anything about them. Doug, why is that?
I don't know. Sounds kind of hypocritical to me.
Yeah, it sounds a little bit hypocritical. It seems like we're in a league where they say, players, you know, you don't endorse any alcohol. Please don't endorse alcohol. No DUIs, please. But yet, a beer sponsor is their biggest sponsor. Doug, how do you feel about that?
Like I said, sounds very hypocritical.
Well, they make a good comedy team, but do they have a point? Let's bring in Keith Reed, sports business analyst and former senior editor of ESPN, the magazine. Welcome back to Rise Exchange.
Great, thanks for having me back.
Set up what sort of caused this faux press conference?
Well, last week after the Seahawks game, Marshawn Lynch, during the media scrum at his locker, essentially just answered every single question from every single reporter with one word. He said, yeah, over and over and over again. He was very displeased. He doesn't like to talk to media in general. He's done this before. The NFL levied a $50,000 fine against him last year for doing the same thing, but then pulled it back and said, we're not going to levy it against you if you don't do this again. And then he did it again, and that's what set up Richard Sherman's press conference today.
Isn't Richard Sherman and Doug Baldwin maybe whining a little bit? These are multi-million-dollar players, and they make their money because the league makes money.
Absolutely, and more to the point, they make their money because the league makes most of its money from media. So what you're essentially saying is, we don't want to talk to the very same media that who are responsible for us getting the enormous paychecks that we get to make a game. Now, do they have a point? Absolutely. The NFL has been hypocritical on many things about player discipline, about the difference between how they treat players and coaches. Bill Belichick very often gives the head coach of the New England Patriots very often gives press conferences that sound exactly like what Richard Sherman did the other day. But at the end of the day, this is where you make your money. You make your money from the media companies who pay the league, and so you're going to tell the media companies who are paying the league hundreds of millions of dollars to afford your salary, we're not going to talk to you for 5 minutes after a game. That's a little bit of a silly way to make the point.
And also, let's remember that the media is, to some extent, surrogates for the paying public who buys tickets and goes to the games. So you're speaking to your fans.
Absolutely, you're speaking to your fans. But what you have seen in recent years through social media especially is players taking advantage of the opportunity to go directly to fans through their Twitter following, through websites that they've set up. Chad Johnson, or Ocho Cinco as he calls himself, set up something real similar a few years ago when he was still a player. It didn't work out too well for him as he's now not in the league. His career was cut short largely because many of his antics off the field, and teams didn't want to take a chance on him anymore. So this is sort of a dangerous game that you can get into. And I'm not saying, already Marshawn Lynch is not expected to be back with the Seattle Seahawks next year. Some other team, of course, will want him. But, it's a little bit, seems like a little bit of a trifle for him to say, I don't want to talk to media after a game. Of course, this is coming from a media guy like me, so I'm in the business.
We're in the business of getting them to talk.
To talk to him, so take my words with a little bit of a grain of salt.
Okay, Keith Reed, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Coming up, what not to do on your honeymoon? Our favorite person of the day is next. You're watching Arise Exchange.
There is a reason Africa is called the new frontier. What was once potential is now an opportunity ready to be seized. Once revered for our resources, today's wealth lies in our people. People who build the cities that shape the future. People who know an idea in one place means business in another. A generation for whom technology means there are no borders, no boundaries. We are the new lions in a brave new world, kings of the urban jungle. And there's a bank that puts the world in our pocket and the future in our hands. UBA, Africa's global bank.
Time now for our favorite person of the day, when we pick one person who grabbed our attention, and not for the right reasons. Today, it is a start to a honeymoon the groom would rather forget, and probably his wife. British man Mohammed Kila was en route on a plane to Cuba with his new bride when he decided to celebrate his wedding by getting blind drunk. And I think you know where this is going. Reports say Kila was drinking from a bottle of vodka that he picked up at the duty-free shop when he began arguing with his wife. Couldn't even get a good bottle of vodka. His wife got up and changed seats to try to get away from him. Then police say Kila began threatening the plane's crew. And that's when they had enough, and the Thomas Cook airliner was forced to divert, landing in Bermuda, where he was taken off and arrested. His wife? Well, get this. She continued on to Cuba without him. They go pretty easy on wayward passengers in Bermuda, by the way. Kila was fined just $3,000. No word on whether he's in Cuba trying to woo back his wife. And so Mohammed Kila is our favorite person of the day. Next, drinking your way to better profits, a look at investing in whiskey. You're watching Arise Exchange, where it is 5 o'clock somewhere. Stay with us.
Apple unveiled new products today. Did it meet expectations?
Apple stock is up 20%.
The White House says it has proper measures to contain the spread of Ebola. This seems to be, in some ways, exploding. What are officials saying?
We remain focused on working with our partners on the ground to stop the epidemic.
Enhanced measures have been put in place in Africa and the United States.
This is hitting home in a very real way, and I think, yeah, we need to be concerned.
Hello and welcome to Arise America. I'm Debbie Turner-Bell.
You've heard of investing in rare bottles of wine, but what about whiskey? As consumer tastes grow for whiskey and bourbon, should you consider adding whiskey to your investment portfolio? Let's bring in Nicholas Pollacchi, CEO of the Whiskey Dog and the Whiskey Isle. Nicholas, welcome. We brought you all the way in from Scotland, New Jersey. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me here, sir.
I want to start with the concept of Japanese whiskey, because when I think of whiskey, like everybody, we think of Scotland, and we think of American whiskey, but not Japanese whiskey. So tell us about how this is changing the environment.
Actually, we're in a very lucky time, I suppose, in the whiskey world, because so many distilleries are now opening up. Of course, in Scotland, this is our bread and butter. It's the second largest export out of Scotland is our whiskey industry, accounting for about $7 billion worth of export trade. Then we have, of course, some wonderful distilleries opening up, especially in Japan, Taiwan, and places like this. And the whiskey that I brought along for us here is a Japanese whiskey. It's Nikka, single malt whiskey. It's a 12-year-old called Miyagi-Kyo. Very elegant. Again, these distilleries have been around for almost 100 years, believe it or not. And they've really refined the processes of distillation, and that's something worth honouring.
So the Japanese have been doing this for some time now. Why is it now sort of hitting our radar here?
It's an interesting point. Actually, what's happening right across the board is that brown spirits, and in particular whiskey's hitting the radar for everybody. So, Irish whiskies are doing particularly well. Canadian whiskies are growing. Single malt Scotch whiskey, of course, is continuing to grow across the globe. So it makes sense that Japanese whiskies then just fall into that.
So if you want to invest in whiskey, and we're not talking about investing in a distillery, we're talking about actually investing in the product and buying it. What do you recommend, and what do you look for?
It's a great question. There's a couple of things that I always look for, especially the Whiskey Dog. We advise private clientele on how to invest into the world of whiskey. It's a passion-driven investment, so it's the same thing as buying art, and that's really what we're looking for.
What your tastes like, basically.
Exactly, but more than that, when you're looking at investment-grade whiskies...
This is very yummy, by the way.
Yeah, it's fantastic, isn't it? It really is. It's a wonderful drop. The Glenrothes is another whiskey. Again, this is a brand that I love to look at. This is their new 2002. This is the second release of a 2002
Scottish
vintage. It is single malt Scotland, from Speyside in Scotland. They bottle less than 2% of all the whiskey that they actually produce at the distillery as their vintages. So you're getting really the creme de la creme. Now, what we're looking for when it comes to investment-grade whiskies is rarity, collectability, and whether or not it's part of a wider collection.
Does it make a difference if it's single malt or blended?
To some extent, because single malts trade higher. One, they're more expensive to produce, therefore they tend to carry a higher price tag. With that being said, that's why single malts tend to dominate that kind of more luxurious price point for whiskey collectors.
Why the difference in the taste of whiskey? What kind of makes up how the character of the spirit tastes?
A multitude of different things, but predominantly I would look at two things. Distillation, so the size and shape of the stills are going to change the flavour of the final product, and then the maturation process, so the types of casks that you're maturing the whiskies in over longer periods of time. Especially in Scotland, we can mature for 20, 30, 40 years. We want to make sure that we're balancing those flavours out.
So when you're looking at investing, you're looking at Scotland, obviously, maybe Japan, but not the United States.
No, I think what you're actually looking for is individual bottles. We don't look at such a broad spectrum of saying one particular brand. For example, we're looking at one particular expression of whiskey from that particular distillery.
Okay.
So we're really cherry picking out the creme de la creme all the way throughout the process in order to build, a really comprehensive portfolio of investment grade whiskies, as it would be.
And the price points that you recommend people start at?
For me,
where can it go up to? What's the most expensive you can buy?
I'll give you a working example. I mean, you can spend, I think, Macallan recently sold a bottle for $630,000, which is nuts.
But you do ever drink that? I mean, it's just like investing in wine.
Well, the point of an investment is that you can sell it later. Now, that's a very difficult price point to start at. So I like to look at things anywhere from kind of $200, $300 a bottle, ranging right up to probably about $10,000 or $15,000. Those are whiskies that I think, in particular, this Glenrothes.
I mean, asked to ask you about bourbon. Bourbon is is a strictly American product.
Yep.
It's made with corn.
Yep.
Does bourbon have any investment possibilities?
No, there are actually. There's a great example actually that's about to be released. The most awaited for release is obviously Pappy Van Winkle, which is what people look for in the United States. They make a very small number of these bottles, and again, that's going back to the rarity platform that I was talking about earlier. These just happen to be bottles
Like
that
art.
people are looking for.
It's about rarity.
Absolutely, that's it. And then whether or not there's going to be a demand for the resale later down the line.
5 seconds left. It's going to be a good year for whiskey.
It is, I hope so. I hope so.
Nicholas, thank
for
you so much.
Thanksgiving, yeah.
Have a good Thanksgiving.
Cheers.
Let's take a look at the markets again before the Thanksgiving holiday. The Dow, NASDAQ, and S&P 500 all trading up in the green. The markets will be closed tomorrow. We will see you back here on Monday. I'm Andrew Schmertz. Thanks for watching Rise Exchange. Have a very good Thanksgiving. Please stay ready.